My brother whispered, "Say hello to sharks," and shoved me off the yacht in the middle of the ocean. My wife? She just stood there, smiling. Their plan was to steal my $5.60 billion fortune. But when they came home, I was waiting. "I've got a gift for you too. My name is Alexander Blackwood, and I'm about to tell you a story that will shake you to your core." At 45 years old, I had everything a man could dream of. A tech empire worth $5.6 billion. A beautiful wife named Victoria. And what I thought was the unwavering loyalty of my younger brother Marcus. But on that fateful Tuesday evening in the Caribbean, I learned that the people closest to you can become your greatest enemies in ways you never imagined possible. The day started like any other aboard my 300-foot luxury yacht, the Phoenix. We were 3 days into what was supposed to be a relaxing family vacation, Victoria, Marcus and myself cruising through the crystal blue waters of the Bahamas. The sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, and I was feeling more content than I had in months. My latest AI software had just secured a government contract worth hundreds of millions, and I was finally ready to step back and enjoy the fruits of my labor. Victoria looked stunning in her white sundress, her blonde hair catching the evening breeze as she sipped champagne on the deck. She had been my wife for 8 years, the woman I met during my struggling startup days who claimed to love me, even when I was living on instant noodles and sleeping on office floors. Marcus was lounging nearby, seemingly relaxed, but I noticed he kept checking his phone with an unusual urgency that should have been my first warning sign. "Alex," Victoria called out sweetly, "come take a picture with us by the railing. The sunset is perfect." Her smile was radiant, the same smile that had captured my heart all those years ago during a tech conference in Silicon Valley. I remember thinking how lucky I was to have found someone who understood the demanding nature of building an empire, someone who supported my crazy work hours and celebrated every victory alongside me. I walked over to join them at the yacht's edge, the warm Caribbean breeze filling my lungs as I wrapped my arm around Victoria's waist. Marcus positioned himself on my other side, and for a moment, we looked like the perfect family, successful, happy, united. But as Victoria raised her phone to take a selfie, I caught something in Marcus's eyes that made my blood run cold. It wasn't the brotherly affection I was used to seeing, but something darker, more calculating. "You know, brother," Marcus said casually, his voice carrying a strange undertone I had never heard before, "I've been thinking about our childhood a lot lately. Remember how you always got everything you wanted? The better toys, the better grades, the praise from our parents? You always were the golden boy, weren't you?" I laughed nervously, thinking he was just reminiscing. "Come on, Marcus, we've both done well for ourselves. Your investment firm is thriving, and I've always made sure you were taken care of." It was true. I had given Marcus seed money for his business, bought him a mansion in Beverly Hills, and included him in many of my most profitable ventures. I thought I was being a good big brother, sharing my success with family. "Taken care of," Marcus repeated, his smile not reaching his eyes. "Yes, like a pet. Like a dependent. Always living in the shadow of the great Alexander Blackwood. Always being introduced as Alex's little brother at parties and business functions. Do you know how it feels to be defined entirely by your relationship to someone else?" Victoria moved closer to the railing, her phone now forgotten. "Marcus," she said softly, "it's time." The way she said it, with such finality and purpose, made my heart skip a beat. This wasn't a casual conversation anymore, this was something they had planned. Time for what? I asked, but deep down I was already starting to understand. The pieces were falling into place with terrifying clarity. Marcus's recent questions about my will, Victoria's sudden interest in my offshore accounts, the way they had both insisted on this particular yacht trip despite my preference to stay home and work on the new AI project. "Time for you to say hello to the sharks," Marcus whispered, his hands suddenly gripping my shoulders with surprising strength. Before I could react, before I could even process what was happening, he shoved me with all his might. The last thing I saw was Victoria's face, not shocked or horrified as I would have expected, but smiling with cold satisfaction as I tumbled backward over the railing. The impact with the water knocked the wind out of me, and the shock of the cold Caribbean sea sent adrenaline coursing through my veins. I surfaced, gasping and disoriented, watching in disbelief as my own yacht began moving away from me. "Marcus, Victoria!" I screamed, my voice echoing across the empty ocean. "This isn't funny. Come back." But they weren't coming back. Through the growing distance, I could see them on the deck, Victoria now and Marcus. His arms, their silhouettes getting smaller and smaller against the fading sunset. The realization hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't a momentary madness or a tragic accident. This was murder, carefully planned and coldly executed by the two people I trusted most in the world. As I treaded water in the vast expanse of ocean, with no land in sight and darkness beginning to fall, my mind raced through the implications of what had just happened. They thought they had killed me, which meant they would return home and begin the process of claiming my fortune. Victoria, as my wife, would inherit everything initially. But I knew that behind her beautiful facade was a woman who had been planning this betrayal for months, maybe even years. And Marcus, my own brother, had been willing to commit murder for money that he could have simply asked for. The water was surprisingly warm, but I knew that wouldn't matter once night fell completely. Sharks were a real possibility in these waters, but hypothermia and exhaustion were more immediate threats. I had to think, had to survive, had to find a way to turn this nightmare into my advantage. They thought Alexander Blackwood was dead, floating somewhere in the Caribbean with the fishes. They had no idea who they were really dealing with. You see, what Marcus and Victoria didn't know was that I hadn't built a $5.6 billion empire by being soft or unprepared. Growing up in the rough neighborhoods of Detroit, I had learned to fight, to survive, to always have a backup plan. My success wasn't just built on intelligence and hard work. It was built on an understanding that, in this world, you can never truly trust anyone, and you must always be prepared for betrayal. As I floated in that ocean, watching my yacht disappear into the distance, I remembered the survival training I had undergone years earlier when I first started making serious money. Wealthy individuals are targets, and I had spent considerable time and resources learning how to survive in extreme situations. I knew how to conserve energy while treading water, how to signal for help, and most importantly, how to stay calm when death seemed inevitable. The first thing I did was remove my shoes and shirt, creating makeshift flotation devices. The shirt could be inflated with air and tied off to provide additional buoyancy, while the shoes could be used to signal aircraft if any passed overhead. I oriented myself using the last traces of sunlight, determining which direction was most likely to have shipping lanes or islands. But survival was only the first part of my plan. As I floated there in the darkness with bioluminescent plankton creating an ethereal glow around me, I began planning my revenge. Marcus and Victoria thought they were so clever, but they had made several critical mistakes. First, they assumed I would die in the ocean, a reasonable assumption, but they didn't account for my survival skills or my refusal to give up. Second, they didn't realize that I had been suspicious of their behavior for weeks and had already taken precautions. You see, 3 months earlier, I had noticed some irregularities in my personal accounts. Small amounts were being transferred to shell companies I didn't recognize, and Victoria had been asking very specific questions about my business operations. When someone has as much money as I do, paranoia isn't a character flaw. It's a survival mechanism. So I had hired a private investigation firm to look into both Victoria and Marcus without their knowledge. What they discovered was shocking. Victoria had been having an affair with Marcus for over 2 years. They had rented an apartment together in Miami under false names, and they had been systematically studying my financial empire, looking for weaknesses and opportunities. They had consulted with lawyers about inheritance laws, researched untraceable poisons, and even looked into ways to make a murder look like an accident. The yacht accident was just their latest and most elaborate plan. But here's the thing they didn't know. I had been feeding them false information for weeks. The accounts they thought contained my real fortune were decoys, funded with just enough money to make them look authentic. My actual wealth was spread across dozens of hidden accounts and shell companies around the world, protected by legal structures they couldn't even imagine. If they succeeded in killing me, they would inherit approximately $50 million. A fortune to most people, but less than 1% of my actual net worth. As dawn broke over the Caribbean, painting the sky in soft pinks and golds, I spotted something on the horizon that made my heart leap with hope. It was a fishing boat, still far away but heading in my general direction. I began swimming toward it, using everything I had learned about ocean survival to conserve my strength while making progress. My shirt, now inflated and tied to my wrist, served as both flotation device and signal flag. The boat belonged to an old Cuban fisherman named Carlos, who initially thought he was seeing a ghost when he pulled me from the water. I was sunburned, dehydrated, and exhausted, but very much alive. Carlos didn't speak much English, but he understood when I offered him $10,000 cash to take me to the nearest island with the hospital and to tell no one about finding me. During the boat ride, I used Carlos's satellite phone to make several calls. The first was to my head of security, a former Navy SEAL named James Morrison, who had been protecting me for over 5 years. "Jim," I said when he answered, "this is Alex. I need you to listen carefully and do exactly what I tell you. As far as the world is concerned, I died yesterday in a boating accident in the Caribbean. Do not contradict this story, do not let anyone know I'm alive, and activate Protocol 7 immediately." Protocol 7 was a contingency plan I had developed years earlier for exactly this type of situation. Jim would secure my real assets, activate surveillance on Victoria and Marcus, and prepare for my eventual return from the dead. The beauty of being presumed dead is that you can observe your enemies without them, knowing you're watching, and you can plan your revenge without interference. The next call was to my lawyer, David Chen, who had helped me set up many of the legal protections for my wealth. "David, it's Alex. I'm alive, but Victoria and Marcus don't know that. I need you to let them proceed with claiming the inheritance from the decoy accounts, but I want everything documented. Every lie they tell, every fraudulent claim they make, every step of their betrayal. I want it all recorded and admissible in court." My final call was to Dr. Sarah Martinez, a plastic surgeon who specialized in working with high-profile clients who needed to change their appearance for security reasons. "Sarah, I need a complete facial reconstruction. Nothing too dramatic, but enough that I won't be immediately recognizable, and I need it done quickly and quietly." Over the next 6 weeks, while Victoria and Marcus believed I was feeding fish at the bottom of the Caribbean Sea, I underwent extensive surgery and recovery. Dr. Martinez was a master of her craft, subtly altering my facial structure, adding some gray to my hair, and even changing my body language through specialized training. When the process was complete, I looked like a distant cousin of Alexander Blackwood, rather than the man himself. During my recovery, Jim provided me with detailed reports on Victoria and Marcus's activities. They had played their parts perfectly, returning from the tragic accident with tears and devastation. Victoria gave interviews to the media, describing how her beloved husband had fallen overboard during rough seas, and how Marcus had heroically tried to save him. The Coast Guard had conducted a search, but given the depth of the water and the presence of sharks in the area, they eventually called off the operation and declared me legally dead. The funeral was quite touching, according to Jim's reports. Victoria wore black Chanel and cried beautifully for the cameras, while Marcus gave a moving eulogy about his beloved brother and how he would carry on my legacy. They had invited all the right people, said all the right things, and played their grief to perfection, but Jim's surveillance revealed the truth. That same night, they celebrated with expensive champagne and passionate encounters at the Miami apartment they thought no one knew about. What made their betrayal even more painful was learning the depth of their deception. Victoria had never loved me. She had targeted me from the very beginning, researching my background and carefully crafting a personality that would appeal to a lonely, ambitious young entrepreneur. Every shared memory, every intimate moment, every time she had said "I love you," it had all been an elaborate con game designed to position herself for this eventual payday. Marcus's betrayal cut even deeper. I discovered that he had been embezzling from my companies for years, skimming money from deals and redirecting funds to his personal accounts. His investment firm was actually failing badly, and he had been using stolen money to maintain the facade of success. Worse, he had been sharing confidential information about my business operations with competitors, undermining deals and costing me millions in lost opportunities. But the most shocking revelation came when Jim discovered they had tried to kill me once before. 6 months earlier, my car had suffered what appeared to be brake failure, sending me crashing into a guardrail on a mountain road in Colorado. I had survived with only minor injuries, chalking it up to bad luck and poor maintenance. But Jim's investigation revealed that the brake lines had been cut and traffic. Cameras had captured Marcus's car in the area just hours before my accident. As I processed this information, any remaining sympathy I might have felt for them evaporated completely. This wasn't a crime of passion or a momentary lapse in judgment. This was a systematic campaign of murder and theft that had been going on for years. They had tried to kill me once, failed, and then planned an even more elaborate attempt that they thought was foolproof. By the time my recovery was complete, Victoria and Marcus had successfully claimed the $50 million inheritance and were living a lifestyle of incredible luxury. They had bought a mansion in Malibu, matching Ferraris, and were planning an extravagant wedding in the French Riviera. Marcus had also been elected to the board of directors of my former company, positioning himself as the grieving brother who would carry on my vision. But their happiness was about to come to a very abrupt end. The night I chose for my return was the anniversary of their attempt to kill me, exactly 1 year after Marcus had whispered "say hello to the sharks" and pushed me into the Caribbean Sea. They were hosting a dinner party at their Malibu mansion, celebrating what they believed was the perfect crime. The guest list included business partners, celebrities, and politicians, all the people who had once sought my favor and were now courting my widow and my grieving brother. I had spent weeks planning every detail of this confrontation. Jim and his team had been monitoring their security systems, mapping the layout of the house and identifying the best ways to ensure our conversation would remain private. I had also prepared several surprises that would make this evening unforgettable for everyone involved. At exactly 10:47 p.m., while the party was in full swing, I walked through the front door of the mansion that had been purchased with my stolen money. The security guard at the entrance was one of my employees. Jim had arranged for several of my people to be working the event. He didn't recognize my altered appearance, but he had been instructed to allow me entry when I provided the correct code word. I made my way through the crowd of guests, many of whom had attended my funeral just months earlier. It was surreal, watching these people laugh and celebrate while having no idea that the supposedly dead man was walking among them. Several people looked at me curiously, as if I seemed familiar, but they couldn't place me, but no one recognized Alexander Blackwood in my new face. Victoria was holding court in the main living room, regaling guests with stories about her late husband's generosity and vision. She looked absolutely stunning in a red cocktail dress that probably cost more than most people's cars. And she was wearing the diamond necklace I had given her for our 5th wedding anniversary. Marcus was nearby, playing the role of the supportive brother-in-law, nodding thoughtfully as Victoria spoke about carrying on my legacy. I waited in the shadows until the perfect moment presented itself. Victoria was just finishing a story about our first meeting, describing how I had swept her off her feet. With my romantic nature and generous heart, when I stepped into the circle of guests surrounding her. "What a beautiful story, Victoria," I said, my voice now slightly different due to the surgical alterations but still recognizable to someone who had lived with me for 8 years. Though I remember our first meeting a bit differently. The wine glass slipped from Victoria's hand, shattering on the marble floor as her face went completely white. Marcus, who had been laughing at something a guest had said, suddenly stopped mid-sentence and stared at me with an expression of pure terror. Several guests looked confused, clearly sensing the tension but not understanding its source. "I'm sorry," Victoria stammered, her composure completely shattered. "But you look like... you remind me of..." She couldn't finish the sentence, couldn't bring herself to say my name in front of all these witnesses. "Alexander Blackwood," I said calmly, removing the tinted glasses I had been wearing and allowing them to see my eyes, the one feature that no amount of surgery could completely change. "Your late husband. Your murdered husband. The brother you threw to the sharks." The reaction was immediate and dramatic. Several guests gasped and stepped backward, while others pulled out their phones to record what they clearly realized was going to be an historic confrontation. Marcus looked like he was about to faint, gripping the back of a chair for support as the color drained from his face. Victoria, to her credit, tried to maintain some semblance of control. "This is impossible," she whispered. "You're dead. We saw you fall. We searched for hours. The Coast Guard confirmed it." "Did you search for hours?" I asked conversationally, as if we were discussing the weather. "Because the surveillance footage from my yacht tells a very different story. It shows you and Marcus celebrating with champagne approximately 30 minutes after you pushed me overboard." It shows you making love on the deck where you thought I had just died. It shows you dividing up my personal belongings like pirates sharing treasure." The guests were completely silent now, realizing they were witnessing something far more dramatic than any movie or television show. Marcus finally found his voice, though it came out as barely more than a croak. "Alex, please. Let me explain. It wasn't supposed to happen like that. We never meant for you to actually die. It was just supposed to be a scare, a way to make you realize how much you needed us." I laughed, a sound that held no warmth or humor. "A scare, Marcus? You whispered, 'Say hello to the sharks' before you pushed me into shark-infested waters 60 miles from the nearest land." Victoria smiled, while she watched me fall. "You left me to die, took my money, and then celebrated your success. If that was a scare tactic, it was remarkably thorough." Victoria suddenly found her courage, perhaps realizing that maintaining the lie was no longer possible. "You want to know the truth, Alexander? Fine. Yes, we planned it. Yes, we wanted you dead. And you know what? I'm glad we did it. Do you know what it was like being married to you? Everything was about work, about money, about building your precious empire. I was nothing more than an accessory, a trophy wife to parade around at business functions. And Marcus?" I asked, turning to my brother. "What's your excuse for trying to murder your own blood?" Marcus straightened up, and for a moment I saw a flash of the arrogance that had driven him to this point. "You never respected me, Alex. Every success I had you claimed credit for. Every failure you blamed on my incompetence. You treated me like a child, like someone who needed to be managed rather than an equal partner in the family business. So you decided the solution was murder and theft?" "We decided the solution was to take what should have been ours anyway," Victoria interjected. "You had more money than you could spend in 10 lifetimes. We just wanted our fair share." "Your fair share," I repeated slowly. "Let me tell you about fair shares. Victoria, you received a generous allowance throughout our marriage, plus access to unlimited credit for anything you wanted. Marcus, I gave you seed money for your business, bailed you out when you made bad investments, and included you in deals worth millions. But apparently, generosity isn't enough when greed takes hold." I gestured to Jim, who had been waiting near the entrance, and he began distributing folders to each of the guests. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for interrupting your evening, but I thought you might be interested in seeing some documentation about your hosts. In those folders, you'll find evidence of the systematic theft of my assets, records of their affair, transcripts of their planning sessions for my murder, and detailed financial records showing how they've been spending my money since my supposed death." The guests began opening their folders, and the gasps and murmurs of shock filled the room. Marcus lunged forward, trying to grab the papers from the nearest guest, but Jim's security team moved quickly to restrain him. "This is all fake," Marcus shouted. "He's been dead for a year. This is some kind of imposter trying to steal our inheritance." I pulled out my phone and showed the screen to everyone in the room. On it was a video feed from the yacht's hidden security cameras, showing the moment Marcus pushed me overboard and Victoria's smile of satisfaction. The audio was crystal clear, including Marcus's whispered threat about the sharks. "I had cameras installed throughout the yacht months before our trip," I explained. "I suspected something was wrong with your behavior, so I took precautions. Everything was recorded and automatically uploaded to secure servers. Your confession, your celebration, your complete lack of remorse, it's all documented." Victoria was now crying, but they weren't tears of remorse. They were tears of rage and frustration. "You bastard," she hissed. "You let us think we had won. You let us spend a year believing we were free of you. This is psychological torture." "Psychological torture?" I asked incredulously. "You tried to murder me twice, stole millions from my companies, and spent a year spending my money while pretending to mourn my death. And you think I'm the one guilty of torture?" The party guests were now openly staring and recording everything on their phones. Several had already called the police, and I could hear sirens in the distance. This confrontation was going to be front-page news around the world within hours. "Here's what's going to happen," I announced, my voice carrying the authority that had built an empire. "Victoria, the prenuptial agreement you signed specifies that adultery voids any claim to my assets. Since you've been having an affair with my brother for over 2 years, you're entitled to exactly nothing. The $50 million you've been spending belongs to me, and I'll be reclaiming every penny. Marcus, as my business partner and brother, you had access to confidential information that you sold to competitors. That's corporate espionage, and the damages run into the hundreds of millions. But more importantly, you attempted murder, which carries a life sentence in most jurisdictions. The police arrived at that moment, flooding into the mansion with Detective Sarah Rodriguez leading the team. I had worked with Detective Rodriguez before on some corporate security issues, and she recognized me despite my altered appearance. "Mr. Blackwood," she said, clearly struggling to process the situation, "we received reports that you were deceased." "Greatly exaggerated, Detective. I have evidence of attempted murder, fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. I believe you'll find everything you need in these documents." I handed her a comprehensive file that Jim had prepared, containing all the evidence we had gathered over the past year. As the police began reading through the evidence and taking statements from witnesses, Victoria made one last desperate attempt to manipulate the situation. "Alexander, please," she said, her voice taking on the sweet, seductive tone that had once made me believe she loved me. "We can work this out. We're still married. We can start over, put all this behind us." I looked at her for a long moment, remembering the woman I had thought I was marrying 8 years earlier. The woman who had claimed to love me for who I was, not what I had. The woman who had promised to stand by me through good times and bad, in sickness and in health, until death do us part. "Victoria," I said quietly, "when you smiled as I fell into that ocean, when you celebrated what you thought was my death, when you spent a year pretending to mourn, while enjoying the fruits of murder, you killed any possibility of reconciliation. Some betrayals are too deep to forgive, and some broken trusts can never be repaired." Marcus was handcuffed and being led away, still protesting his innocence despite the overwhelming evidence against him. "This isn't over, Alex," he shouted. "You can't prove we actually intended to kill you. It'll just be our word against yours." "Actually," Detective Rodriguez said, holding up her phone, "we have the confession you just made in front of 30 witnesses, all of whom recorded it on their phones. Plus Mr. Blackwood's security footage, financial records showing premeditation, and evidence of your previous attempt to kill him with the car accident in Colorado. I'd say this case is about as solid as they get." As Victoria was also being arrested, she turned to me one final time. The mask of beauty and charm had completely fallen away, revealing the cold, calculating person she had always been underneath. "You think you've won," she spat. "But everyone will know what kind of man you really are. Ruthless, unforgiving, cruel enough to let people think you were dead just to get revenge." "Let them think what they want," I replied. "I survived murder, rebuilt my life, and exposed the truth about people who claimed to love me while planning my death. If that makes me ruthless, I'll wear that label proudly." The mansion that had been bought with stolen money was now empty, except for Jim, Detective Rodriguez, and myself. The party guests had been dismissed after giving their statements, and the media was already gathering outside the gates. This story would dominate headlines for months, and I knew my privacy would be non-existent for the foreseeable future. "What happens now, Mr. Blackwood?" Detective Rodriguez asked. "This is going to be one of the biggest trials of the decade." "Now," I said, looking out at the ocean visible from the mansion's windows, "justice happens. Victoria and Marcus will face the consequences of their choices, and I'll continue building the empire they tried to steal. But I'll be much more careful about who I trust in the future." Over the following months, the trial became a media sensation. The evidence was overwhelming: video footage, financial records, witness testimony, and recorded confessions made it impossible for Victoria and Marcus to mount any credible defense. Victoria was sentenced to 25 years for conspiracy to commit murder and fraud, while Marcus received life without parole for the attempted murders and embezzlement. The $50 million they had stolen was recovered and returned to my accounts, along with additional assets they had hidden in various shell companies. The investigation also uncovered evidence of other crimes they had planned, including attempts to murder several of my business partners who they saw as obstacles to accessing my wealth. But perhaps the most satisfying part of the entire ordeal was what happened to my companies during my year of being dead. With Victoria and Marcus thinking they were in control, they had made several catastrophic business decisions that nearly destroyed everything I had built. When I returned to reclaim my empire, I found that my stock prices had plummeted. Key employees had quit, and several major contracts had been lost due to mismanagement. However, this gave me an opportunity to rebuild everything from the ground up, implementing better security measures, more robust legal protections, and most importantly, a deeper understanding of human nature and the lengths people will go to for money. I also used my experience to help other wealthy individuals protect themselves from similar betrayals. I started a consulting firm that specializes in family security and asset protection, helping people identify potential threats from within their own circles and implement safeguards against fraud and violence. The plastic surgery that had helped me hide my identity was reversed over the course of several procedures, returning me to my original appearance. But the psychological changes from the experience remained permanent. I had learned that trust is the most dangerous luxury a wealthy person can afford, and that even family members can become deadly enemies when enough money is involved. 2 years after the trial, I received a letter from Victoria in prison. She had found religion, she claimed, and wanted to apologize for her actions and ask for my forgiveness. She wrote about how much she regretted her choices and how she hoped I could find it in my heart to give her a second chance when she was eventually released. I read the letter once, then threw it away without responding. Some betrayals are too deep for forgiveness, and some broken trusts can never be repaired. Victoria had made her choice when she smiled as I fell into that ocean, and she would have to live with the consequences of that choice for the rest of her life. Marcus also reached out through his lawyers, offering to provide information about other criminal activities in exchange for a reduced sentence. I refused to negotiate with him. He had whispered "say hello to the sharks" before trying to murder his own brother, and no amount of cooperation could erase that moment of pure evil. Today, 5 years after that night in the Caribbean, I'm worth more than I ever was before. The publicity from the trial paradoxically had helped my businesses by establishing me as someone who couldn't be broken or defeated. The story of my survival and revenge became legendary in business circles, and many people wanted to work with someone who had demonstrated such resilience and determination. I never remarried, though I had several relationships with women who knew my story and understood why trust came so slowly for me. The experience had taught me that love without trust is meaningless, and trust without verification is dangerous. I dated carefully, investigated thoroughly, and never allowed anyone complete access to my life or finances. The yacht where it all began was eventually sold. I couldn't bring myself to set foot on it again, as it held too many memories of betrayal and attempted murder. Instead, I bought a larger, more advanced vessel with the latest security technology and a crew that was thoroughly vetted and completely loyal. Sometimes, late at night when I'm alone on the new yacht, I think about that moment, when Marcus pushed me into the ocean and Victoria smiled with satisfaction. I remember the cold water, the fear, the realization that the people I loved most had become my greatest enemies. But I also remember the strength I found in that dark water, the determination to survive and reclaim my life, and the satisfaction of seeing justice served. The ocean that was meant to be my grave became the birthplace of a stronger, wiser, more dangerous version of Alexander Blackwood. Victoria and Marcus had tried to feed me to the sharks, but they forgot one crucial detail. Sometimes the sharks lose, and sometimes the prey becomes the predator. In the end, their plan to steal my fortune had backfired spectacularly. Instead of inheriting billions, they had earned themselves prison cells and destroyed reputations. Instead of living lives of luxury built on murder, they were spending their days in concrete boxes, paying the price for their betrayal. As for me, I had learned the most valuable lesson of all, that true strength isn't measured by how much money you have or how successful your business becomes. True strength is measured by your ability to survive betrayal, overcome impossible odds, and rebuild your life from nothing. It's measured by your capacity to trust again after being betrayed, to love again after being deceived, and to find peace again after experiencing the depths of human cruelty. The sharks in the Caribbean are still there, swimming in the same waters where Victoria and Marcus tried to end my life. But they're swimming without their intended meal, and they'll have to wait for someone else to feed them. Because Alexander Blackwood is still here, stronger than ever, and ready for whatever challenges life might bring next. After all, when you've survived being thrown to the sharks by your own family, everything else in life seems remarkably manageable by comparison. And that perhaps is the most beautiful ending of all. Not just survival but The transformation of a victim into someone who can never be victimized again. The fortune they tried to steal has grown beyond their wildest dreams. The empire they tried to destroy has become more powerful than ever, and the man they tried to kill has become a legend. Sometimes the best revenge isn't just living well. Sometimes it's living so well that your enemies spend the rest of their lives regretting their decision to underestimate you. Victoria and Marcus had wanted to say hello to the sharks on my behalf. Instead, they had introduced themselves to a predator far more dangerous than any creature swimming in the ocean. And that predator was the man they had tried to destroy, risen from the depths of betrayal with a hunger for justice that would never be satisfied. In the end, they got exactly what they deserved, and I got something far more valuable than revenge. I got my life back, my strength back, and most importantly, I got the knowledge that no matter what anyone tries to do to me, I have the power to survive, to fight back, and to win. The ocean is vast and deep, but it's not deeper than human resilience. The sharks are dangerous and hungry, but they're not more dangerous than human determination. And the people you trust most can betray you in ways you never imagined, but they can't break you unless you allow them to. Alexander Blackwood learned to swim with sharks, and he came back stronger than ever. That's not just survival, that's triumph. And sometimes triumph is the most beautiful ending of all.